So, welcome to the Anthony Atiase Experience. My name is Anthony Atiase, and I'm the host of this podcast. My first guest is a great friend of mine. His name is Kodwo Ghartey-Tagoe. He's the Executive Vice President, Chief Legal Officer, and Corporate Secretary for Duke Energy. He leads the Office of the General Counsel, and he's responsible for legal governance and compliance functions. He's held various roles, leadership roles, since joining Duke Energy in 2002 and has received awards for his commitment to diversity. A native of Ghana, Mr. Ghartey-Tagoe earned a Juris Doctor from Duke University and completed the Advanced Management program at the Wharton School of Business. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Anthony. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
Absolutely. And it's definitely always a pleasure speaking with you. One of the important things for me for this podcast is really understanding people's stories, understanding how they got to where they are, because I think stories are a testimony that will provide breakthrough for individuals who are able to connect to those stories that they hear. So I kind of want to take it back from the beginning. What was your upbringing like?
So thank you again for the opportunity to join you today. As you said, I'm from Ghana. I was born in Ghana. I grew up in Ghana. And when in Ghana, I was born in Accra, the capital. My parents were both started out as teachers. My father eventually went to the Ghana Broadcasting Corporation to work there. He was actually the first Ghanaian newsreader on Ghana television. So he was in broadcasting, and somewhere down the line, he decided he wanted to go to university. He did not have a college degree, right? He'd gone to secondary school and then went to a teacher training college to be a teacher, taught for a while, and then had the opportunity to join Ghana Broadcasting. So I remember my childhood, the earliest memories of my childhood are when we lived in Salt Pond, which is a town about, I'm guessing, 70 miles or so from Accra along the coast due west, while my father was studying in Cape Coast at the University of Cape Coast, which is 90 miles from Accra. And he would come home on weekends, but during the week, he'd be on campus studying. So my earliest memories of growing up in Ghana go back to those periods. And that was, I think I was about 6 years old at that time. And 5 to 6 that time. I remember going to public schools in Salt Pond. I remember even at that age, walking a fair distance to go to school with my older brother, Kwesi, who is 4 years older than I am. And then my father finished university and we moved back to Accra. And I remember, them putting us in a public school there, Kanda Estate 2 Primary was the name of the school. And I think it still exists, actually. Wow. We were there for a couple of semesters, and then we switched to another school on the main military base, actually, in Accra, called Burma Camp. And so we went to, it was called Armed Forces Experimental Primary School. And they later changed the name to Garrison Primary. So I remember going to school there. Most of the kids there, their parents were in the military, Army, Navy, whatever. My parents were not. I'm still not sure how we got in there, but it was a great experience. And then you go through class 6, or the equivalent of sixth grade, and you take a standardized test called the Common Entrance Exam. And then you select which high school you want to go to. Equivalent U.S. equivalency would be a combination of middle to high school. We called it secondary school. And I selected the school my father went to, Fansman School, and was admitted. So I went to Fansman School as a first year in 1975. A year before the school celebrated its 100th anniversary in existence. It is the oldest secondary school in Ghana, in case you didn't know that.
Wow.
So I was in the class of 1975, or the entry class of 1975, and I was there And in Ghana, you do the first phase of your secondary education is 5 years, and then you take another standardized test, the O level, GC, General Certificate of Exam O level.
Hmm.
And based on qualification and what schools you select, you get to do 2 more years of secondary school. So I chose to go back to advancement school after my 5 years, took the exam, did well, and got in. So I did 2 more years. And while there, my final year, I was the the equivalent of the student body president. And
Wow.
we call it head boy, because this was an all boys school that was founded by the Methodist Church. And it's still an all boys school, and it still has a strong affiliation with the Methodist Church, but it is a government owned institution, like most secondary schools or schools in Ghana. So after those additional 2 years, my parents this time were living in East Africa, in Zambia. My father was working on a UNESCO project, training broadcasters for the country of Namibia in Southwest Africa. And so I joined them that summer. And then at the end of the summer, I went to Canada to go to university. I went to McGill University in Montreal, Quebec. And I studied economics and finance, joined honors degree in economics and finance. And largely because of the number of years of secondary school I'd had in Ghana and the good grades I ended up with, I was able to do my degree in Canada in 3 years instead of
Wow.
4 years.
Wow.
And then I applied to law school, went to Duke University Law School. And, I had fallen in love with Duke a couple of years before while I was at McGill. While I was at McGill, my oldest sister was at East Carolina University. And she had met this young man who later became her husband, Tawatis, and he lived in Durham, North Carolina. So one summer I decided to come check out the guy she had met. So I actually rode the train all the way from Montreal to Raleigh, North Carolina. So it's a
Wow.
24-hour trek.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun by myself on the train. But and in those days, there was not much going on in Durham except for Duke University. And so my now brother-in-law took me to visit the campus. I fell in love right away. Went to the law school, talked to a professor who encouraged me to apply and showed me the things that could make my application more attractive to the school. I applied, I got admitted. I was waitlisted for a while, but eventually I got in and graduated Duke Law. And then I thought, stop me anytime if I'm going on too long. But
Okay.
I thought I would, finish law school, work for a year, and go back to Ghana and hopefully join the Foreign Service. But one of my professors actually encouraged me to stay in the U.S. And he actually helped me get there. My company turned out, the law firm I was working with, also found that I was providing enough value that they wanted to keep me. And so they applied, and through the work visa process, I obtained a green card and ended up staying in this country. But my first stop was in D.C., working for a law firm in D.C. Subsequently moved to Richmond, Virginia, where I worked for 2 other law firms. And then in 2002, moved to Duke Energy in Charlotte, where I am.
Wow. Wow. That's amazing. I wanted to ask you something. When you went from Namibia to Canada, was that your first time going to considered a developed country, or did you go to London? Did you go to the States? Or was Canada the first stop?
So one correction, I never went to Namibia.
Okay.
I was in Zambia.
Zambia, right,
Zambia,
right.
yeah.
Okay, okay.
And yes, Zambia to Canada was the most advanced country I had been to by that point. Yes.
Okay. And what was that like?
Oh yes, in addition to the weather, it was much colder than I had ever experienced. And oh, by the way, I think you know this, East Africa tends to be a little cooler than West Africa.
Yes, absolutely.
So, my first trip outside Ghana was the trip I made to Zambia.
Okay.
I went through Kenya. The flight I took, we changed planes in Kenya. So I was in Kenya for a few hours before I made it to Zambia. And I do remember, and in Ghana, I didn't own a sweater. The closest thing to a sweater I owned was a vest, right?
Yes.
So that's all I had. And I was cold on the plane. I was cold off the plane, and I thought that's the worst it could possibly be until I arrived in Canada,
Oh, goodness.
and I arrived in Canada on September 8th, 1982.
Wow.
And the warmest thing I had was my suit jacket. And even in September, I think that, I'd look back now and the temperature was probably in the 60s, but it felt like minus 50 to me. But that was quite an experience for me, adjusting to the weather in Canada. Certainly adjusting to the availability, the ease of acquisition seemed, at least mentally, that's the way I was thinking about it. Whatever I wanted, I could walk into a store and get.
Right.
And when I left Ghana in 1982, that was not the case. I left during a very difficult period in Ghana's history, when, what we call provisions or basic commodities were hard to come by, and they were being rationed. So you had to go line up at a department store to buy 5 cans of sardine or 5 cans of evaporated milk, limited quantities of rice and oil. And, that was when I left Ghana. Those were tough times.
Right.
And then I end up in a country where you can walk into any store and buy any quantity of anything you wanted.
As much as you want. Absolutely.
Exactly.
No, that's interesting. So now that you were in Canada, at what point did you say, okay, I want to be a lawyer?
Yeah, it's interesting. Growing up, I went through various phases. At one time, I wanted to be an engineer. I wanted to be an architect. I wanted to be a pilot. At one time, I even wanted to join the U.S. Marines when I was in Ghana. I think I watched a movie and was so impressed. I said, I need to join them.
Yeah.
And all of that. And so when I got to Canada, though, because of the degree I was focused on, economics and finance, I thought, okay, I'll go to business school and then, I don't know, join some company and run a business, very, general view of what I wanted to do. And then I remember one of my classes and later, my third year or so, it was a business class, I think it was capital markets. The professor was counseling students on how to get into business school, what schools to focus on. And he made a comment about his strong advice was for everyone to go out and work for a couple of years before they applied to business school. And so sitting there as a foreign student who did not know how I could work in the country for 2 years before I could apply to business school, I said, gee, that sounds like if I really want to be, have the required credentials to go to business school, that may be foreclosed to me. So that's when the idea of going to law school really crystallized in my mind. And because I started doing some research and I realized, a lot of very influential people in Canada and in the US were lawyers. In Ghana too, were lawyers. I realized that there were a lot of people who were in the business world with law degrees, right? So having a law degree wouldn't foreclose me from doing what I thought I wanted to do, get into the business world. But I did know that if I had a business degree, I couldn't practice law until I went to law school. So I thought, gee, my law degree actually could give me some options here. And I love options.
Yeah.
And so that's how I thought about it and processed it. But I'll tell you, after I'd been practicing law about 30 years, one day I was home visiting with my mother in Ghana, and I asked her if I ever showed any interest in the law growing up. And she told me a story that I remembered, which was that when I was young, so I was about 8, 9 years old, some of her relatives came to visit her and were complaining about a land dispute they had back in their village and how things weren't going well for them. And after they left, I asked her why they came, and she told me they were in a land dispute and the court system wasn't favoring them. And I said, when I grew up, I'm going to be a lawyer and I'm going to take care of this. So
wow.
I never took care of that, but I became a lawyer.
That's awesome.
There you go.
No, that's an awesome story. You talked about the professor who was kind of helping in Canada, helping you navigate what it looked like, I believe, to go to Duke. How important is mentorship when you think back of, I'm sure, people who've kind of helped you along the way?
I mean, mentorship is crucial. It is
Mm.
crucial to all of us, regardless of what world we find ourselves in, what country, what we're doing. It is not just career related. Even your home life, even your relationships outside of work could benefit from mentoring. And there's a difference between a mentor, a sponsor, all of those things. I know we could get very technical about it. But at the end of the day, someone else standing on the outside whom you can consult with, who is free to speak into your life, who can give you advice when you need it, and sometimes when you don't think you need it.
Mhm.
All of that has been so influential to my own growth and development as a person and as a career and in my career and as a leader here at Duke. I've mentioned the professors who guided me along the way. The one, for example, who encouraged me to stay in this country. I remember him very fondly. In fact, just yesterday, I was talking to somebody about him and how he impacted my life.
Wow.
I can think about the mentor at the law firm, first law firm I worked with, who introduced me to the guy who the firm that ultimately hired me in Richmond, Virginia. I can think about the guy who hired me at Duke, Paul Newton, who's now a state senator, and his influence on my career here at Duke. I can name, and there are multiple. I mean, in Richmond, Virginia, the guy who hired me there at Flippin, whom I'm still very close to today,
Mm.
and how he influenced me. I'll tell you one story, particularly about Ed. Um, I remember very well, one time a law firm made me an offer or, was about to make me an offer to go work for them. And Ed Flippin, who his self-interest would have been to discourage me from doing this, came to me and said, so what would your salary demands be when they call you? And I hadn't really thought about it. So I
Hmm.
said, okay. I quickly thought and I said, I've never really gotten more than a 3-4% raise in my career. Maybe I asked for 10%. And Ed sort of looked at me shocked and said, what? These people should pay you X, which was about, at the time, I'd say closer to maybe 60%
Oh,
or
wow.
50% increase. He said they should pay you that without blinking. And I said to myself, really? I'm worth that much?
Wow.
But this was the mentor in him,
Yeah.
showing me I had perhaps more value than I had placed on myself. Right. And sure enough, I went into this interview. They asked me what I was looking for, and I told them the number my friend Ed had suggested. And initially they blinked, and I said no. Now I know my worth. Well, I didn't say that, but I was thinking, now
Right.
I know my worth. I'm not going to back down. And sure enough, they offered it to me. Plus,
That is crazy.
and that was one significant. I ended up not taking that job, right? But that was one significant and very impactful influence I got from a mentor that I will never forget.
Wow.
And there are so many other stories I could tell you. And so knowing that, I also personally devote a lot of time to mentoring.
Mm.
At any one time, I don't know how many people, at least 10 people that I'm mentoring, if
Wow.
not more. You know,
That's an amazing story. I think it kind of leads into my next question. Coming from Ghana, went to Canada, of course, via Zambia, and here in the States. How important is it for you to be your authentic self? Because I think sometimes people, who may come from a different background, try to navigate what it is to be themselves or understand their value, or they may feel like, oh, well, as long as this company's paying me, that's good enough. I'm getting money. I'm working this job that I should be grateful for, but they really don't know their true value. And how important is it for them to know that value and be their authentic selves?
Well, I think it's important for you to be authentic because it's
Yeah.
kind of hard to sustain being anything else for a
Mhm.
long time, right? To be yourself. Having said that, though, I will tell you, I used to tell employees, you know, bring your whole self to work. And then I sit in meetings sometimes and hear people criticizing the way somebody was dressed, the way somebody said something, So I'll confess, I stopped saying that to
Mhm.
folks because you can't go around and coach everybody. You can't go, I mean, some things happen in the moment where you're not there, and not everybody thinks there's anything wrong with what the person judging you is saying,
Right.
right? But at the same token, so having said that, so for example, if you're going into a professional environment and yourself says, I wear t-shirts all the time, and wearing you're not going to Silicon Valley or someplace where it's common and standard practice to wear those clothes.
Yeah.
If you wear that into a different environment, you're going to get judged for being not appropriately dressed,
Hmm.
right? So you've got to be mindful of those things. And so there's a balance to this, I'm saying. But when I say it's important to be authentic, it's what I'm saying is in terms of your values, in terms of even the way you think, right? Um, I do know I try to be to be myself in all environments,
Yes.
right? And so the way I behave with someone who is 10 steps in the org chart from me, below me, is the same way I behave with a guy who is 10 steps above me in the org chart. You know, that's what I view as being authentic because then I know I'm consistent.
Hmm.
And there's a high premium on consistency, in the workplace. If you do good work, be consistent. If you do bad work, change to doing good work consistently. If you do bad work, being consistently bad will get you fired.
Exactly.
So I'm talking about, doing the right things consistently, or being you consistent. Everybody knows what to expect when they approach you. Blowing hot and cold in your relationships. That's what I'm talking about here.
Yeah.
So it's important to be that authentic person that people can relate to, regardless of the environment you're in.
Absolutely. No, that's so important. I think back to what at the beginning of our conversation, you talked about being in Ghana at a difficult time and the rationalizing of food and stuff like that. Were there other moments like in your life that were challenged? I mean, it was challenging times, but you had these pivotal moments where you said you've learned from whatever those challenges may have happened. You learned from it and decided to move forward. Because I think sometimes some people just they can't deal with whatever challenges come their way because they've never really dealt with challenges before.
I mean, and we all will face challenges. I think nobody in this world is promised a life free of challenges. And so we should not be surprised when we face challenges. The question is, how do you deal with it, right? Um, when you fall down 7 times, get up.
Yeah.
So that's sort of my philosophy of life. I think it's biblically based, and that's important, to keep that in mind. My own personal experiences. I've told you a very nice, smooth journey from my 5, 6 year old self that makes it sound like my trajectory has always been upward and to the right. That's not true.
Mm.
You know, what I didn't tell you in the early story was that when I switched from that first public school in Accra, which was the equivalent of second grade, to the new school at the military base, I was asked to repeat the second grade.
Oh, wow.
And my parents were not convinced it was based on academic reasons. But nonetheless, I repeated second grade. How
Oh,
many
wow.
people do you know who repeated second grade?
Very few. Second grade. Wow.
No. I'm sure you don't know any. Now
Yeah,
you
I'm
know
just
one.
thinking back. I'm like, wow, second
Now you know
grade.
one. I
Goodness.
remain in second grade. There's one. There was also a time in one of the law firms I worked with where they said, we don't think you're doing as well as we'd like you to do. We would like you to move on.
Oh wow.
I didn't tell you that part.
No, you didn't.
No. And then there was a time right here at Duke too, where I was demoted.
Wow.
I had a new boss who reorganized the department, and instead of me continue to be a direct report to the general counsel, I was asked to report to somebody else who reported to the general counsel. That was a demotion.
Wow.
And it was also at the time when I thought I was flying high. I had just gotten a promotion. At the end of the day, you sit back and you say, well, it reminds me of a Bible story. There arose a new Pharaoh who did not know Joseph,
Yes.
and he threw him in jail.
Yeah.
Thankfully, I didn't end up in jail. But there came a new leader who did not appreciate um, that I was excellent at what I did.
Hmm.
The good news is, in about 6 months, he gave me a promotion. He literally created a job, an officer job for me that didn't exist before and hasn't really existed since. Right? So these are all stumbling blocks,
Hmm.
and it boils down to your attitude in response to these challenges. Right? I'm a firm believer that your attitude can determine your altitude.
Absolutely.
If I had gone around moping and complaining about how I was not being treated fairly, I dare say I probably wouldn't be in this company today,
Hmm.
right? Because not very many people like complainers.
Right. No, that is so important.
Or I could have gone upset and said, I'm leaving the company,
Yeah.
and gone and found work somewhere else. But I don't think that would have been the best thing for me to do.
Yeah.
So yes, I could tell you story after story about the challenges I faced, but that's not the point. I think the point is what would I learn from the challenge,
Exactly.
right? And I do believe that these challenges also introduce you to yourself. You find out a lot about yourself in these hard times.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
very easy to be happy when you're on the mountaintop, but can you conjure up some joy when you're
Hmm.
in the valley?
Yeah.
You find a lot about yourself during these times of challenges. And I found that having a purpose, knowing my why do I do what I do? Why do I want to be the best at everything I do? Those things create motivation for me, and because you want to accomplish your goals.
Absolutely. That is so important. I love what you said earlier when you mentioned that you were demoted, but you said I'm good at what I do, and I think the thing is, um, it kind of ties in with that value and people not saying enough of that. If especially when you're good at what you do, it shouldn't kind of sway you from being upset and, like you just said, just saying, you know what, forget this, or moping around, but taking that confidence you have in yourself and still doing the good work. I think is important. So now, when you kind of look back and you think of your journey, um, are there any regrets? Are there any, oh, I should have done this in the past? Or did the dots just connect? There was a reason that you went here. There was a reason that you went there. Because sometimes I think people look back and they regret certain decisions they made.
I don't regret any decision. Well, I don't take that. I take that back. There's some bad decisions I made. I regret.
Right. Right.
But I used to say in response to this question, I've been asked this question before. I used to say, gee, I wish I had studied harder in law school,
Right.
because that was another thing I didn't tell you about. Law school, I didn't do very well in my first year of law school.
Oh,
That was
wow.
the challenge. Here's a guy who was a very good student all through, except for the second year where I repeated. And like I said, it wasn't due to academic performance because I was a very good student.
Right.
I was a good student then. I was a good student in high school. I was a good student in college. Then I get to law school, and gee, everybody there was good. And my first year was a huge challenge for me.
Wow.
It really tested my confidence, and my my focus, my desire to do certain things in life. So those were all challenging times, and so because of that experience, I used to say, gee, I wish I had studied harder and gotten better grades. And then one day somebody looked me in the face and said, gee, seems to have done pretty good with those poor grades you had. And so that also brings to mind this concept of being content, contentment with what you have and contentment with your race, because a lot of us are trying to run other people's races, which are not designed for us. And that's part of why we keep falling down, because, your race, maybe a 5-mile race, and you're trying to run a 2-mile race, and you run out of gas before you get there.
Yeah.
And so those were also lessons I learned along the way. But, is there anything I would have done differently in terms of career decisions? Or I can't think of one. Right. I've made mistakes. That's not what I'm saying. I have made mistakes. And so I wish I had done different things in those situations, but you learn from those too. Right. And so I appreciate the learnings from those mistakes, and I hope not to repeat them. But, I don't regret leaving Ghana. I don't regret going to McGill. I don't regret going to Duke. I don't regret coming to Duke Energy, none of those things. I don't know.
No, that's good. That's good.
I'll say this. I was, never mind. I was gonna say something, but I probably shouldn't.
No worries. No, that's really good. You talked about learnings, and I would say just this amount of time we spent, there were definitely quite a number of learnings that you've provided us. I think about your attitude and determining your altitude and getting that demotion, but not letting it demote who you are as an individual, and just your journey. Coming to Canada, then Duke, and trusting in yourself. I think that is definitely commendable. And I appreciate the time. I think it's so commendable that you've just continued to focus on this path that you're on.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to share my story. I hope it inspires someone.
Yes.
I hope it encourages someone that failing doesn't make you a failure, and falling down doesn't leave you defeated. You can get up, you can dust yourself off, and you can do it again. So that's my goal. That's my why. That's my encouragement, through doing this podcast with you, that others will hear of my experience and believe that they can do it too, and they can get to and do better than I have done.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. And we appreciate you, Mr. Kodwo Ghartey-Tagoe, and I'm sure we'll definitely connect again soon.
Yes, sir. We will. We will.
All right. Thank you.
All right,
Appreciate
Anthony.
it. Take care.
Good to see you.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.